Tysa didn't like to reminisce about her work. She had spent her entire life saving others, yet she couldn't heal herself. She worked as a surgeon, living outside the city, commuting to the hospital in the neighboring town every day. Patients from all nearby settlements would come there. Mostly they were elderly people without their own transportation who couldn't reach the city. Many years had passed since the hospital closed down. There were no more doctors in this small town, and its population dwindled. Some passed away, while others moved to the city. Tysa had long stopped working, but not because the hospital closed. She was welcomed in the city, she just couldn't move. Her condition was very severe. Tysa had a daughter who also dreamed of becoming a doctor. Bonnie, Tysa's daughter, often recalled the story of how her mother performed surgery right in the hospital corridor in the town. The patient's condition was critical, and they wouldn't have made it to the city in time. So, like a true professional, Tysa prepared the space, gathering everyone with medical knowledge around her. Luckily, a young woman who worked as a nurse in the city happened to be in town. She became Tysa's assistant. The patient was fortunate that day. Tysa saved his life. Bonnie would ask her mother to retell the story almost every day. "I'm tired of telling this story over and over again. Don't you get tired of hearing the same thing?" Tysa laughed. "But it's a real feat," her daughter admired. "I'll tell my children so they can be proud of their grandmother." "It's just a shame I won't live to see them," Tysa added sadly. As a doctor, Tysa understood well that she was living her last months, perhaps even weeks. She had been battling her illness for several years, but to no avail. "I'll proudly carry the title of doctor. I'll continue our legacy," Bonnie often repeated. Her mother wasn't very pleased with her choice. Somehow she felt Bonnie wasn't emotionally strong enough for such a profession. They often argued about it. Tysa believed her daughter should enroll in an economics university. Then she could work in a field not associated with life and death. But Bonnie dreamed of helping people. She saw it as her calling. "Why are you against it, Mom?" Bonnie couldn't understand. "You've saved lives all your life. You're known and loved not only in our town, but in neighboring ones too. How many grateful patients, how many tears of joy and happiness were shed in our home when you simply gave an injection to some old lady." "Daughter, being a doctor isn't always about saving lives. Sometimes patients died during surgeries," Tysa replied. "Do you know how hard it is to tell someone that there's no hope left? How many tears were shed in my office, and not at all from happiness. I'm now in the shoes of those patients I told there was no hope. It's a dreadful feeling." "But I'll be giving people life," Tysa's daughter insisted. "I'll become a midwife and witness the birth of children." Tysa sighed heavily. Every conversation ended with both of them sticking to their guns. Tysa decided not to argue with her daughter anymore. After all, it was her own life. Let her learn from her own mistakes. She accepted the fact that she simply watched everything, drawing from her own experience. Perhaps her daughter wouldn't approach her profession in the same way and would truly find her calling in it. The last thing Tysa managed to say was that she supported Bonnie. She wished her daughter happiness, told her she believed in her, and would always love and be proud of her. Then she closed her eyes and never opened them again. Bonnie sincerely admired her mother. It was so hard for her to see her like that when her strength was leaving her. The girl didn't leave her mother's side. She sat with her all evening and all night, and in the morning, Tysa's heart stopped beating. Bonnie had long been prepared for this, but as it turned out, it was impossible to truly prepare for it. She understood that her mother had finally been relieved of her suffering, but she so desperately wanted to hear her gentle voice once more, to look into her eyes filled with love and kindness, to feel the warmth of her body. Although Bonnie knew there was nothing she could do for her mother, she deeply mourned her absence. She was left completely alone in this world. She had no more family. A month after the funeral, Bonnie received good news. She had indeed been accepted into medical school. She packed her things, realizing that she would never return to this home again. Bonnie was leaving for the city, about to explore a new, completely different world. How much interesting and unusual lay ahead of her. However, she would always remember her native home with love. It had a special place in her heart. Bonnie sat on her mother's bed for a long time. There were indentations from her mother's hands and feet in some places. She lay on her pillow, trying to inhale every molecule that carried a piece of her mother's soul. Then Bonnie went out onto the porch, sat on the steps, and remembered how, when she was a little girl, she used to run around this small garden. Tysa was almost always at work, so every evening, the girl tried to memorize everything in as much detail as possible. Tysa devoted all her free time to her daughter because she missed her too. Sometimes she even took little Bonnie to work with her. Perhaps that's when the girl fell in love with the hospital atmosphere. The last words of her mother were very important to Bonnie. How good it was that she changed her mind and finally allowed her daughter to go to medical school. The girl would follow her dream anyway, but now she was doing it with absolute calmness. If her mother allowed it, then surely everything would work out. There were simply no other options. It was a bustling Saturday evening. In the kitchen of one of the city's restaurants, the staff was busy as there were a huge number of guests. The chefs couldn't keep up with cooking dishes. Waiters brought new orders one after another. "I have a couple at the third table. They've already asked about the salad 5 times, complained waitress Lily. "I'll end up with no tips at all." "You're worried about tips?" scolded her chef Ren. "I can't even get a clean plate delivered for plating dishes. Rayan can't even peel vegetables fast enough. Bonnie, how much longer?" "I've already washed everything for a long time. I told Tom to take the dishes away 10 minutes ago, but he just keeps bringing me new plates," Bonnie replied. Yes, this was the same Bonnie who dreamed of becoming a midwife many years ago, who dropped everything and went to the city to attend medical school. Now she was 34 years old, working as a dishwasher in a very well-known city restaurant. However, it wasn't that Bonnie had given up on her dream. She hadn't been expelled from university either. She successfully graduated. For several years, Bonnie lived and worked happily. She was a midwife. Everything turned out just as the young girl from the small town imagined. Besides fulfilling her dream, she also found her best friend, Margot. Margot also dreamed greatly of a medical career, but could only become a nurse. However, she excelled in this field. Bonnie couldn't understand why her mother was against her becoming a doctor. She loved her job immensely and was happy. Her relationships with colleagues and patients were excellent. But in the end, she found herself in the restaurant kitchen, next to dirty dishes, all because her mother was right, and Bonnie couldn't handle her first defeat. Medicine isn't always about life, sometimes it's about death. Bonnie remembered one November day for the rest of her life. She woke up 40 minutes before her alarm and couldn't fall back asleep. She had a bad feeling in her gut. She had a night shift at work, but before that she needed to go to the hairdresser's. There surely wouldn't be any adventures or mishaps there, but for some reason, Bonnie's heart sensed trouble. Unfortunately, her expectations were met. Bonnie had just brewed herself some tea and cut a slice of bread for a sandwich when suddenly her phone rang. In the familiar melody, she heard anxious notes. She immediately knew that nothing good would come from this call. With trembling hands, she checked who was calling. It was her hairdresser. "I won't be able to see you today," Julia said. "I have a fever. I can either book you with another stylist or reschedule your appointment for the weekend." "Please reschedule it for the weekend," Bonnie replied. Julia apologized several times and thanked her regular client for understanding. Bonnie breathed a sigh of relief. Her day cleared up, which meant she could do some cleaning or something else productive. The main thing was to somehow shake off this unpleasant feeling of anxiety. Let the news of the cancellation of my hair appointment be the worst thing that happens today, thought Bonnie. As soon as she placed her phone on the table, the ringtone disrupted the silence once again. Bonnie answered, now a bit calmer, not even bothering to check who was calling. "Bonnie, come urgently," shouted the hospital manager. "We've got a woman in labor and we can't find Alex anywhere. Can you believe it? He was at his desk half an hour ago, and now he's not even answering his phone calls. We don't have time to look for him. This is a serious case." Bonnie tried to get some information over the phone, but the manager told her that everything would be explained on site. Anxiety and a sense of foreboding engulfed Bonnie once again, a feeling she had struggled so hard to overcome. She quickly changed out of her bathrobe into jeans and a sweater and hurried to the hospital. The door to the maternity ward slammed shut. Bonnie ran into the staff room to hide from everyone. She sat on the floor next to the couch, hugged her knees, and cried loudly. About half an hour later, Louisa, the hospital manager, approached her. "You're not to blame for what happened," Louisa said softly. "We've had talks with this woman before. She was even on our records, but it was all in vain. She showed up for delivery under the influence. But she was a person. In an instant, 2 lives were lost. There was nothing I could do," Bonnie replied tearfully. Less than an hour ago, a pregnant woman and her baby had died before her eyes. Bonnie had never been so close to death before. She had long been prepared for her mother's passing, and she didn't blame herself for it. This time it happened right at her workplace. She was delivering the baby and couldn't save either the woman or her child. "Now it's clear where Alex disappeared to," Louisa tried to change the subject. "He knew who he would have to deal with and ran away. He won't fare well when he returns." "He's not coming back," Bonnie quietly replied. "I tried to call him too. He said it was over between us and that he's leaving for good." Bonnie had been in a relationship with the midwife Alex. Louisa had long hinted to Bonnie that Alex wasn't the best choice. There were many complaints against him, and he somehow managed to get hired at the hospital in a strange way. Now Bonnie understood what her bad feeling and anxiety were about. Besides experiencing a patient's death for the first time, she had lost her loved one on that day, and the career she had dreamed of all her life. No one was going to fire Bonnie, because everyone understood she wasn't to blame in this situation, but she said she wouldn't return to work. At first, she requested a 2-week leave. She needed to sort out her feelings, battle the depression that had engulfed her. Several nights, she dreamt of the deceased baby and the horrifying expression on the mother's face, which remained etched in her memory forever. She relived the situation 1,000 times, watching the negligent young mother's agony unfold, repeating the same actions that ultimately couldn't save these people's lives. Bonnie's phone kept ringing. Her colleagues were concerned about her condition, but she didn't want to talk to anyone. She didn't want to do anything at all. When Bonnie approached the mirror, she saw a murderer there. But she remained indifferent to all of Louisa's and other doctors' arguments. She believed there were no more culprits in this situation but herself. When it was time to return to work after her leave, Bonnie realized she would never go back there. She didn't want to hear or see anything related to medicine. She simply lay and stared at the ceiling all day long. She had almost stopped eating and sleeping. Bonnie lost a lot of weight due to stress. Only one person truly worried about Bonnie's condition. It was her friend Margot, who worked as a nurse at the same hospital. When Bonnie didn't show up for work and didn't answer any calls, Margot decided to visit her. She knocked on the door for a very long time, asking Bonnie to open it. She knew Bonnie was home. Only after 15 minutes did Bonnie open the door. "Oh my God," exclaimed Margot when she saw her friend. "When was the last time you slept?" Bonnie didn't answer. She just stepped aside so her friend could enter the apartment. Then she returned to the spot where she had spent the last 2 weeks, on the couch. Margot slowly walked through the apartment. There were thick layers of dust on the shelves, which used to compete in sterility with a medical office. On the kitchen table stood a cup with moldy tea. Next to it was a piece of bread that had turned into toast. It was the same breakfast Bonnie had prepared for herself on that fateful day when she was called to work. She hadn't cleaned up anything, hadn't even touched the cup with the aromatic drink. Empty chip and cookie packets were scattered around Bonnie. Margot tried to hide her true feelings about what she saw, but she didn't do it well. Eventually, she realized her friend was in severe depression. All Margot wanted was to pull Bonnie out of this terrible state. "Is this what you've been eating all this time?" asked a surprised Margot. "Did you decide to end it this way?" "I don't even remember how all this garbage ended up here. I don't remember ever having these chips and sweets in my house before, let alone eating them," replied Bonnie. Margot sat down next to her friend and hugged her tightly. She said it was time to return to normal life. "People die every day," Margot said quietly, "and among them are children. That's life. There's nothing we can do about it." "Yes, but people don't die in the hospital right in front of a doctor every day," Bonnie replied. "You're mistaken. Doctors aren't gods. If it's someone's fate to die, then so be it," Margot continued to support her friend. "Do you think I haven't faced death? Patients have died on me too. And they weren't always elderly. We must always be prepared for that." "I won't go back to the hospital," Bonnie said in a quiet voice. "My mother was right. This isn't for me. She always warned me, said I wouldn't handle it. Mom was always right. Even now I hear her voice saying, "I warned you." Margot was horrified by her friend's words. She knew how much Bonnie had dreamed of this profession, how she admired it when she first entered the hospital ward, how she inspected her workplace, and with what enthusiasm she talked about each of her patients. Bonnie could describe every baby in detail. Margot never understood how she could even distinguish and remember them. "I don't know anyone who loves their job as much as you do," Margot replied. "You were made for this work. Do you remember how much your patients love you? The women who come to deliver their second or third child ask specifically for you to attend their births. Giving it all up because of some alcoholic who ruined herself? It's nonsense. You're just still in shock. Ask for another week off." Bonnie stared blankly and shook her head. She couldn't overcome her inner resistance. Some unknown force in one moment deprived her of the ability to enjoy her favorite job. She didn't know how she would live on, what she would do. Sorely she was only certain that she would never return to the hospital again. "That's too bad," Margot said when Bonnie voiced her intention to resign. "I think Louisa will take you back as soon as you decide." The friends went to the hospital together, Bonnie to write her resignation letter and Margot to support her and stay for the shift. The head of the department was indeed very upset when she learned that Bonnie wouldn't return to her position. As Margot had expected, Louisa said she would always welcome her back. "I hope you'll calm down, sort yourself out, and make the right decision," the head said. "I don't regret Alex running away, but you were one of my best employees. Forgive me for leaving you in this position. You lost 2 specialists at once," Bonnie said sadly. "Don't worry about me, I'll find new staff," Louisa replied. "You better think about your mental state. Take care of your own future."
Margot barely held back tears as she watched her friend gather her things. She couldn't help but notice the look with which Bonnie surveyed the ward, and then the corridors and offices. Margot asked Bonnie once again to reconsider, saying it wasn't too late to cancel everything, withdraw the resignation, and continue doing what she had dreamed of all her life.
"No, I'm sorry, but I can't. This place is not for me," Bonnie quietly replied. The woman left the hospital without looking back. She felt relieved. However, this feeling of freedom quickly turned into a sense of hopelessness. Where could she go now? Where to look for work? The midwife's salary was small, so Bonnie had no savings to live comfortably and take her time finding a new job. But she couldn't even imagine that her fate would be decided so quickly.
A small dog ran past Bonnie, dragging a leash behind it, indicating that it had escaped. The girl chasing after it confirmed this. The owner desperately shouted and called for her pet, but it was too scared to respond to her commands. Another second and the fluffy creature would have been under the wheels of passing cars, but Bonnie prevented that. She stepped on the end of the leash, preventing the dog from running onto the road. Just inches away from its snoot, a buzz passed by. Bonnie bent down, picked up the leash, and pulled the puppy towards her. "Thank you so much," exclaimed the owner, who had just rushed up as Bonnie managed to pick up the dog. The woman handed the dog back to its owner and smiled. She watched with pleasure as the owner hugged the trembling body of her pet. They were both scared, but now they were together again. "I always dreamed of having a dog like this, but I just don't have time to take care of it," said Bonnie, petting the dog on the head. "If you're not busy, I'd love to invite you for a cup of coffee as a thank you. By the way, my name is Susan," the girl said. Bonnie agreed. She had nothing else to do now, and she wanted to distract herself from her sad thoughts. But she couldn't forget about her worries. Susan immediately noticed that her new acquaintance looked very sad. She asked what was wrong. Bonnie didn't want to lie and told her everything honestly. It even made her feel a little better to talk about it. "You know, your story is familiar to me, or rather its main character, if I may put it that way," Susan said when Bonnie fell silent. "Just about a month ago, my classmate passed away. And I know she was pregnant. If we're talking about her, as harsh as it may sound, maybe it was lucky for the baby not to become the child of such a mother." Hearing this didn't make Bonnie feel better. She believed there was nothing worse than death. And a mother, no matter who she was, would always remain a mother. Susan told her that her late classmate didn't lead the most righteous lifestyle. "Let's not dwell on that situation. It doesn't matter anymore," Susan said. Bonnie nodded silently. She didn't want to delve back into those memories she had tried so hard to forget for weeks. For a while, the new acquaintances sat in silence. Susan looked pensive. She nervously tapped her foot and fiddled with a napkin in her fingers. It seemed like she was considering something, but Bonnie wasn't aware of her thought process. She wasn't even looking at her. The woman's gaze was fixed on the funny dog sitting on the couch next to its owner, eyeing the dessert. "I believe a cup of coffee is not enough reward for saving Richie's life," Susan broke the silence. "I understand that you're out of work now. I can't promise anything, but I have an offer for you." Bonnie looked at Susan attentively and showed interest in her offer. She said she was currently willing to take any position, even cleaning floors or housekeeping. She wanted to do anything but midwifery. Susan mentioned that her father owned a restaurant and was currently in need of kitchen staff. "Of course, it's not the job you dream of, but he pays his employees well. Plus, a position like that will help you distract yourself from bad memories," Susan concluded. Bonnie said it was perfect for her. She wasn't expecting a great position anyway, and she needed to pay for her apartment somehow. So Bonnie ended up at the restaurant. She had been working as a dishwasher for 6 months now. She wouldn't say she was happy, but everything was fine with her. There was no time to dwell on life and death at work. None of her colleagues even knew that Bonnie had recently been an obstetrician-gynecologist. The salary was indeed good, even better than at the hospital. After her shifts, Bonnie was so tired that she practically went straight to bed as soon as she got home, so she didn't have the opportunity to dwell on sad memories. Now, let's return to the day when there was a terrible hustle and bustle in the restaurant. Lily pressed an empty tray to her chest and leaned against the wall. "Today is definitely a cursed day," she exclaimed. "What could possibly make today's shift even worse?" asked Ren, wiping sweat from his forehead with a paper towel. "Oscar came in with his wife," the waitress replied. "How inconvenient." Everyone in the kitchen was upset except for Bonnie. She had only been working there for a short time and didn't yet know all the distinguished guests of the restaurant. However, she quickly guessed that this Oscar was someone special because no one on the staff had reacted this way to any other visitor. She asked her colleague who the man was. "He's the owner's best friend," her colleague replied. "He loves telling the owner about all the flaws here." "I see. Some angry rich guy," Bonnie concluded. Ren handed the dish to the waitress and then turned to the chefs. He began to give an inspiring speech to his colleagues, trying to convey the idea that they couldn't afford to mess up. But his motivational speech was interrupted by screams from the dining area. Everyone rushed to the door to listen to what was happening, but nothing could be made out. Only the cries of women were audible. Someone was calling for a doctor. "It's just a nightmare," Lily yelled as she re-entered the kitchen. A crowd of employees immediately gathered around her. "Oscar's wife seems to have passed away. Oh my God, she was 9 months pregnant," exclaimed Bonnie's colleague. Everyone was horrified. At that moment, only Bonnie stood emotionless. Death had come back to her once again, and it was another pregnant woman. She felt a pounding in her temples, as if she didn't notice what was happening around her. After Lily's words about death, she stopped hearing anything at all. Bonnie wanted to get some air, so she headed towards the exit, but in her agitation, she mixed up the doors. Instead of the backyard, Bonnie ended up in the restaurant hall. There was chaos with a crowd gathered around a girl. A man sat next to her on his knees, crying and asking if there was a doctor among the people. Bonnie closed her eyes and ears, trying to push through the crowd to get outside. Suddenly, someone grabbed her hand. "Bonnie, thank goodness you're here. Please hurry, someone needs help," a familiar female voice said to her. Bonnie looked up and saw Susan in front of her, already dragging her towards the girl. Bonnie tried to break free from Susan's grip, saying she couldn't help in any way. "Let go, there's a doctor here," Susan said, pushing through the crowd. "I beg you, help," Oscar pleaded. "It's already too late, she's dead. Look, her lips are turning blue," someone from the restaurant patron said. Suddenly, someone shouted that the ambulance was on its way. Among the people, cries continued. Some said the woman couldn't be helped anymore. Others suggested taking her out onto the street. "Please help. It seems she started having contractions and then she lost consciousness," Oscar said, turning to Bonnie. "The ambulance won't arrive for another 15 minutes. I don't believe she's dead." Bonnie carefully examined the victim. She realized almost immediately what had happened to her, and theoretically, she could still save her. "Your wife isn't dead, but the doctors won't make it in time to help her," Bonnie said. The man couldn't hold back his tears. He fell to his knees in front of his beloved woman and whispered softly, "Gina, live, I beg you." Bonnie made a great effort. She couldn't bear to see two people die in front of her again. She understood there was a chance to save her, but she needed to act quickly. She grabbed a knife from the table and shouted for Lily to bring alcohol. "I hope the ambulance arrives on time," Bonnie said. Quickly washing the knife with alcohol, she knelt down and leaned over the pregnant girl. The crowd fell silent instantly. Some turned away so as not to watch what the woman was doing. Horror was evident on their faces. A few minutes of silence passed. Only Oscar's whisper broke it. He was praying. After a few moments, the silence was broken by the cry of a newborn. The restaurant erupted into applause. "Where's the victim?" The doctor from the ambulance shouted loudly as she arrived. The people parted. Bonnie handed the just-born baby to Oscar and then ran out onto the street. Gina was taken to the hospital with the newborn girl. Bonnie didn't see what happened next, and she didn't want to know the further fate of this woman and her husband. On that day, Bonnie lost her job again. She locked herself at home, not going anywhere and not answering phone calls. A week later, Oscar came to the restaurant. The man immediately approached the administrator and asked to call the woman who had tried to save his wife a week ago. "Sorry, but we haven't been able to reach Bonnie for a week. She ran away that day and no one has seen her," the administrator replied. Oscar turned around immediately and headed for the exit. "Is your wife okay?" the girl shouted after him. "Miss, you'd better answer my question," Oscar replied without turning. "We really don't know anything. I don't think she'll be working here anymore," the administrator said. "She definitely won't be working here," Oscar said and left. He went to his friend, who was the owner of the restaurant. He had one goal: to find Bonnie. Susan heard that Oscar was looking for her acquaintance. The girl was very upset. She still didn't know how the story with Gina ended. Her father hadn't told her anything, and she was afraid to ask. Susan only heard that her father had given Bonnie's address to his friend. After that, she became even more anxious. She blamed herself for leading Bonnie to Gina. If Oscar's wife didn't survive, Bonnie wouldn't be doing well for sure. Susan watched as the man headed to his car, got behind the wheel, and immediately drove off. Obviously, he was going to Bonnie. The atmosphere in the third-floor apartment was gloomy. There was no light in any of the rooms. Not even the TV was on. Bonnie lay on the couch, burying her face in the pillow. That's how she spent the last 7 days. Images flashed before her eyes. First, the patient who died in the delivery room appeared, then her baby. Then came the image of Gina, who lay unconscious on the restaurant floor, followed by Bonnie, tremblingly holding the small body of the child. Suddenly there was a loud knock on the door. Bonnie instantly lifted her head from the pillow and then sat up on the couch. Now she could only hear her own heartbeat. It seemed like this sound filled the entire room. Every corner of her apartment was permeated with these rhythmic beats. "Open up, I know you're home," a male voice shouted from behind the door. Now it seemed like Bonnie's heart had stopped. She immediately recognized that voice. A week ago, this person begged her to save his wife. Now he persistently demanded that she open the door. If he managed to find Bonnie's address, there was no point in hiding. Bonnie stood up and approached the door. "It's time to answer for all your sins," Bonnie said grimly, and opened the door. Oscar looked at the woman. Tears streamed from his eyes. Bonnie couldn't understand if he was angry or happy. What was causing his tears? Grief, anger, hatred? Suddenly, Oscar fell to his knees, took Bonnie's hand, and began kissing it. The woman became even more frightened. She stood motionless. Her whole body seemed paralyzed. She was afraid to move. "Thank you," Oscar said softly. "I've been looking for you for so long just to say one thing. Thank you." Oscar lifted his gaze to Bonnie, and now she was looking at him. Now the woman could see for sure that there was no malice in his gaze. It was the look of a lost, grateful, and sincere man. "Why are you doing this? Please get up," Bonnie finally dared to say. She helped Oscar to his feet and invited him into the apartment. For the first time in 7 days, she turned on the light in the apartment and was horrified by the mess it revealed. However, Oscar didn't look at the savior of his wife's dwelling. He stood quietly aside, waiting to be invited further. Bonnie pointed to the first door leading to the living room. There they spent the last 7 days. Oscar and Bonnie settled on the couch. Now they were ready to talk. "Thanks to you, I became a father and avoided becoming a widower," Oscar said. "I apologize for leaving you in the dark for so long, but I just couldn't come to you sooner." With tears in her eyes, Bonnie listened to what Oscar told her. Gina was alive, and as Oscar claimed, it was all thanks to her. The doctor who treated his wife confirmed that there couldn't be any delay. It turns out Bonnie saved both the baby and her mom. The man talked for a long time about how grateful he was, and Bonnie couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You shouldn't be washing dishes even in the best restaurant in town. Your calling is in medicine," Oscar said. "I just had one traumatic event. I can't work in my profession after that," Bonnie replied. But Oscar didn't want to hear any excuses. He claimed that such specialists shouldn't waste their talent. "You can't abandon your calling because of one failure. If you want, you can never work as a doctor, but you must be involved in medicine." "I know how to arrange it," Oscar said. Bonnie looked at him in bewilderment. She didn't understand what the man meant. Then Oscar sat closer and took Bonnie's palm. He looked her straight in the eyes and said seriously, "A person who saved my wife's and daughter's lives cannot live in such conditions. You shouldn't be washing dishes and scraping food scraps off plates. You must do what you've been striving for so long. I know how many years it takes to study at medical school," Oscar said. Bonnie still didn't understand what the man was hinting at, and he couldn't formulate his proposal properly. He wanted to first instill in Bonnie the idea that she deserved better, so she wouldn't refuse his gift. "In short, I want to give you your own clinic," Oscar finally said. Bonnie was in shock. She definitely didn't expect such a stroke of fate. On one hand, she couldn't accept such a large gift, but on the other hand, it was a direct path to the beautiful, carefree life she dreamed of. Currently, she wasn't in the best financial situation. She didn't have much money or work, and medicine was still something she had always dreamed of. But to imagine that one day Bonnie would become the chief doctor, let alone of a private clinic, was beyond even her wildest fantasies. "I won't rush you. Think about this offer carefully," Oscar said. "You should know that such offers are not made twice. I am very grateful to you, so I won't rush you with your decision. Also, I wanted to say that Gina asks you to come visit her. She dreams of meeting you." Oscar left Bonnie with 2 cards. One was his business card, and on the other, he wrote the address of the clinic where his wife was hospitalized. As he was about to leave, he noticed a photograph. "Where do you know this person from?" he asked, pointing to Alex, who was hugging Bonnie in the picture. The woman hadn't yet gotten rid of the photos with her ex-boyfriend. She hadn't thought about them at all. She didn't believe in the story that Alex had set her up and was responsible for what happened to the unfortunate woman who was giving birth. Instead, she honestly hoped that sooner or later he would come back to her. "I can ask you the same question. It seems that this photo clearly shows the relationship Alex and I had," Bonnie replied. "Yes, but I can't imagine what could tie such a beautiful woman like you to this person," Oscar said. Bonnie didn't understand what he was talking about. She asked him to explain where Oscar knew Alex from and why he considered him a bad person. "I admit, initially, like you, I was deceived by his friendliness, but over time I learned that it was all a lie," Oscar began his story. "This person once saved my life. However, later I deeply regretted it." Oscar told how once in a cafe he choked on an olive. He was already suffocating when suddenly Alex quickly grabbed him and saved him. Of course, the millionaire couldn't help but thank the doctor. He gave him a considerable sum of money and promised to always help him. "I didn't expect him to need help so soon," Oscar continued. "Several times I bribed the police for him. Are you aware that he hit someone with his car? Not fatally, fortunately. If it had been fatal, I wouldn't have been able to help him. Several times I paid bribes for him because your beloved liked to drive drunk. I think we are talking about different people, Bonnie said, astonished. Of course, she had been a bit naive. The woman had often seen her beloved behind the wheel while intoxicated. She always scolded him for it. She also knew he had been involved in some unpleasant situations with the police. But Alex always lied to her, saying he was mistaken for someone else. Bonnie believed him because he never faced any consequences, which meant he wasn't guilty of anything. But his final wish shocked me, yet I agreed because he promised never to bother me again. Oscar continued his narrative. And now I feel like I'm also to blame for you deciding to leave your beloved profession. The man fell silent. It was evident that speaking was difficult for him, but he couldn't remain silent. After several minutes of tense silence, Oscar finally revealed what Alex's last wish had been. It turned out that a pregnant patient had approached him with a very unusual request. She was in her last month of pregnancy and suddenly decided she didn't want to be a mother. The girl asked to somehow get rid of the baby. Of course, he was shocked, but the girl was difficult. Although she led an improper lifestyle, she had enough money, Oscar said. She offered your Alex such a sum that he no longer cared about any moral principles. Your young man loved money very much. In short, he injected her with some medicine to make the baby stillborn, but realized that the girl would also get her dose of poison. Alex asked me to arrange his escape from the country. Your Alex is now basking under the hot sun on the islands, but even I don't know how his fate turned out. I suppose it's not bad, as he managed to earn quite well from his schemes. Bonnie was in shock. The girl who died on her shift indeed had some substance found in her blood, but no one paid attention to it because everyone knew she wasn't a virtuous lady. It turns out Alex deliberately set up Bonnie. After all, that time could have ended very badly for Bonnie. The woman held back tears. It was painful and heartbreaking, but she held on. What hurt her the most was that she sincerely believed in this person, even after Louisa told her that Alex probably deliberately ran away. She believed him and waited for the day he would return. Oscar watched as Bonnie's emotions shifted across her face. At first, her expression reflected surprise. Then she appeared distressed. You won't have to wait for my decision, because you're right. I've always dreamed of being a doctor, specifically an obstetrician-gynecologist. I can't see myself in any other profession, Bonnie said. And although I never dreamed of a career as a chief physician, I agree to accept your gift. I'm glad, Oscar replied. You couldn't have made a better decision. They shook hands and said their goodbyes. After the man left, Bonnie finally let her emotions loose. She immediately burst into tears and collapsed face first onto the couch cushion. Bonnie screamed and pounded her fists against the soft surface of the couch. She poured all the pain that had been building up in her heart into her strikes. Her small fists hit the pillows, then the back of the couch. Bonnie screamed, her hair flying in different directions. She only calmed down when she ran out of strength. No one will ever betray me again and take advantage of my kindness, Bonnie screamed, looking at the photo where she and Alex stood embracing. The woman grabbed the frame and threw it into the trash can. Then she opened the album and threw out all the photos where they were together. Bonnie opened the box where she kept her savings. There wasn't much money in it, but now she had no reason to save, as she would soon become the owner of a private clinic. Hello, Bonnie said joyfully. I can't believe it. Have you decided to remember me? Margot asked, surprised and delighted. Bonnie asked if her friend was on shift, but when she said she had the day off, she invited her friend to go shopping. The friends hadn't seen each other for a long time. Bonnie herself had initiated them to stop communicating. She was ashamed to admit that she was washing dishes in a restaurant, but now she had something to share with her best friend. The women had a great time together. Bonnie bought herself several fancy dresses that she wouldn't have even looked at before. Then she told Margot about what had happened to her during the months they hadn't seen each other. Margot was genuinely happy to learn that Bonnie would now be running her own clinic. I hope you'll come work for me. I promise you'll have a decent salary, Bonnie said with a smile. I'll write my resignation letter tomorrow, Margot replied happily. All you have to do now is find a worthy man, and that's it. Your life will be perfect. Bonnie felt embarrassed and replied that she didn't want to think about relationships right now, and besides, she wouldn't have time for that anymore. She didn't want to miss the chance to create the best private clinic in the city, so she needed to dedicate all her time to this endeavor. Bonnie didn't even suspect that she would meet her destiny very soon. The next day, she went to visit Gina. She was pleased that the girl wanted to meet her. Bonnie herself had dreamed of meeting her patient. Bonnie saved her life, but Gina also changed her destiny in many ways. Bonnie finally believed in herself. For a whole week, she lived in ignorance and didn't understand if she had saved the girl. The news that Bonnie's surgery had been successful literally restored her faith in herself. "If I could, I would kneel before you, but I can't get out of bed yet," Gina sincerely said when she saw Bonnie. "Indeed, you'd better lie down and take care of yourself," Bonnie affectionately replied. "I imagined you just like this, with kind eyes and a gentle voice like my mother's," Gina replied. The women talked for a while. Gina repeated more than once how grateful she was to Bonnie for not passing by, for giving her and her daughter life. "By the way, didn't Oscar tell you? We decided to name our daughter after you," Gina said. "I think she will be pleased to know later how a stranger helped her be born." Bonnie was taken aback. She definitely didn't expect that. It was worth suffering through years of medical school for such moments. Even one such story gave her faith in her abilities, helping her to live and work. It seemed that no more words or gifts were needed for her. When Bonnie left the hospital room, she bumped into a man she didn't recognize. She was in a cheerful mood and didn't notice him coming around the corner. As soon as Bonnie raised her gaze to the person whose chest she had just collided with, she was stunned again. She had never seen such a kind and sincere face before. He was a true doctor, in a clean coat, a blue shirt, clean-shaven, and with perfect hair. "Be more careful next time," the doctor said politely and without any judgment. He smiled broadly and Bonnie blushed. She smiled back and apologized. She felt small and defenseless next to such a towering man. Bonnie was about to walk away when the doctor stopped her. "Wait, aren't you the person who saved my patient?" he asked with undisguised interest and delight. Bonnie modestly nodded and was about to continue, but the doctor stopped her again. He introduced himself as Morgan and said he wouldn't mind having such a specialist in his team. "Don't worry, we have a private clinic, so the salary and working conditions will be decent," Morgan added. "Thank you, but now I will be hiring my own staff and we will become competitors," Bonnie replied with a smile. But they were not destined to become competitors. Bonnie indeed got her clinic, made it one of the best in the city, but she and Morgan didn't have competitive relations at all. The man couldn't forget the image of the lovely lady who awkwardly bumped into him. He admired not only her professionalism, but also her beauty. Morgan spent the rest of the day thinking about this woman, and the next day, he even asked Gina if Bonnie planned to visit again. The girl shook her head negatively, and Morgan visibly saddened. "Would you like to get to know her better?" Gina asked. Of course, she noticed the doctor's sadness when she said Bonnie wouldn't be coming back to the hospital. "I just wanted to discuss some work-related matters. Performing such an operation without proper conditions is true professionalism." Morgan tried to lie, but he failed. Gina noticed fear and embarrassment on his face. She immediately guessed that her doctor was very fond of Bonnie. "I can share her phone number with you so you can ask your professional questions," Gina said. Morgan became even more flustered, but nevertheless agreed to take the number. Then he quickly thanked his patient and hurried to leave her room. Gina chuckled kindly as the doctor hurried away. He even accidentally caught the edge of his coat in the door and did it twice before finally managing to leave. "What a sweetheart," Gina concluded and turned to the window. The girl admired the sky, and then they brought her daughter to her. Little Bonnie looked very much like Oscar. What emotional calmness and joy Gina felt at that moment. She was pleased with the thought that she had contributed to the creation of a new, beautiful couple. Morgan paced around the piece of paper with Bonnie's phone number for a long time. He picked up the phone several times, then put it back on the table next to the note. After some time, he finally grabbed the phone and dialed the number, but then hesitated for a long time before pressing the call button. It was a mistake for Morgan to hesitate for so long. Bonnie herself couldn't forget about the charming doctor, but she didn't have his phone number. She only knew the place where he could be found. All morning, The woman thought of a reason that would explain her visit to the hospital. They didn't agree that she would now visit Gina every day, but something told her that the girl wouldn't mind. After all, she didn't necessarily have to enter her room. Bonnie had already opened the wardrobe to choose an outfit. One dress seemed too modest to her, while the other seemed overly revealing. "I need to dress as if I'm not trying to impress anyone but still look dignified," Bonnie said to herself. Then she slammed the wardrobe doors shut and scolded herself for thinking about nonsense. She pondered the same thing over and over again until her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she recognized the voice immediately. Their conversation was awkward but very sweet. That's how Bonnie and Morgan became a couple. They were united by their love for their profession, kindness, and humanity. Morgan was the complete opposite of Alex. Finally, Bonnie felt what it was like to be a beloved woman. Bonnie's life got back on track. She was a successful clinic owner, which they managed together with Morgan. The woman was in a healthy and happy relationship, and Oscar and Gina became good friends to them. They became family friends, and their friendship became so strong that Bonnie became the godmother to the girl whose life she once saved.
All right, everyone's presentations are done,
Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward.
Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked. We could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread. hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.